Hello, ladies. Today we're going to talk about hair care and how we can grow long and strong and healthy hair. And if that requires a bunch of products, or if that's something that we have been sold by these big industries so that they can make a lot of money on our insecurities.
An entire generation sacrificed their hair to a lie, and chances are you're still living by it. For much of human history and across cultures, long, healthy, thick hair tended to be the norm, at least much more so than today, when you have droves of people losing hair in their 20s or unable to grow it past shoulder length due to continued breakage.
I will also say that some of the hair loss is due to things like thyroid issues and hormonal issues, but she's going to talk more about the products that we're using that causes hair loss and also breakage.
This in a time when hairdressers, commercial hair products of every kind, and hairstyling tools are more accessible than ever before. What gives? What did we lose as a culture when we threw out our grandmothers' and ancestors' hair care techniques and began following the advice of corporations instead? And don't write this off. This is an effect that is still happening today. In India, for example, traditional hair care practices like hair oiling are still widely used, and many people there have very thick, long, beautiful hair. But what we can see happening is that when people from India, for example, may be immigrating to the West or just adopting more modern Western hair care techniques, their once beautiful long hair is literally falling out and breaking off. So what we are pinpointing here is something that I'm going to call the cultural burn cycle. Basically, when any kind of revolution in society occurs, be it social, ideological, or technological, it usually ends up destroying much more than it intends to. Within a couple generations, the knowledge and traditions that took hundreds or thousands of years to grow and blossom are not only disrupted, but completely wiped away and forgotten.
Basically, what she's saying is it took thousands of years to come up with these techniques. And I would say the same thing goes for the medical industry. Before, we used to treat things naturally through herbs, through our lifestyle and things like that. But that has also been forgotten in time. And I love that we are evolving and finding new ways to push humanity forward. Right now, in certain areas, we're actually moving backwards. And she's going to dive in more into that now.
Cultural burn cycle applies to bigger turning points in human society, but in this case, let's apply it to the way humans, at least here in the West, care for our bodies and our hair. For all of human history until the last century, knowledge of how to care for one's hair was generally passed down from mother to daughter or father to son. These were techniques that may have been slow or inconvenient by modern standards, but they worked, which is why they stood the test of time. Things like hair oiling, gentle detangling, avoiding drastic haircuts, and gently styling hair in a way to keep it tucked away and protected from the elements, using natural, earth-based ingredients to care for one's hair. And more than all of this, the main gist of historical hair care was viewing one's hair as a sacred extension of one's own body, something that wasn't merely a cosmetic appendage or just a fashion statement, but a part of your body that deserved respect and gentle care, not forcing it into constantly evolving fashion trends and frying it into submission. With the massive political, social, and familial changes of the 20th century, there was something really big happening in the world, much, much bigger than just beauty and hair care. This was a complete reordering of how we as a people view knowledge. Is it something to be passed from family member to family member and treasured for generations? Or is it something we get from constantly evolving experts? Or more likely, money-hungry corporations that promise big things? I would suggest the latter is what has happened.
And I love that you mentioned that these are things that actually worked for centuries. And right now it's being forgotten because we are sold through marketing and through these big corporations the lie that you have to depend on their products to achieve these kinds of results.
Now, before we get into bashing modern hair care ideas, let's just acknowledge some of the good things that have come with time, because definitely some positive things have happened with modern attitudes about hair. First of all, there has been a widening of what is considered to be acceptable beauty standards. This probably has to do with things like the internet, exposing people to a wider range of people and ideas than ever before. Modern hair philosophies have possibly also given more freedom to spend less time on one's hair if you so desire. Commercial hair products, heat styling tools, and shorter haircuts can definitely help with that if saving time is your only priority. And finally, for positives of modern hair care ideas, there is also perhaps a greater appreciation, at least by our current day, of different racial hair textures. This has been a long time coming, and arguably I would say the culture around hair conformity was probably worse in, say, the 1950s than previously in history, but I'm definitely not an expert on this. So what I am suggesting in this video is not that the 20th century hair care revolution didn't achieve anything good or open up more possibilities for some people. It did. But what I am suggesting is that, like any revolution, this created a sort of burn cycle where much more was lost in the process than what was gained, and that hair care traditions that worked were just burned away and forgotten in the course of 1 or 2 generations.
And what she says here is so true. It only takes 1 or 2 generations for thousands of years of knowledge to disappear. So I would say that today we have more accessibility to knowledge, but back in the day they had more depth. They really knew what worked and what didn't because of their ancestors.
So with all that said, let's jump into the top 4 pieces of hair care advice that secretly ruined an entire generation. Because I think in concepts, I am going to break this down into damaging hair care ideas, which then led to a whole lot of on-the-ground damaging hair care practices that I will elaborate on in each section. Keep watching until the last point, because it is a pretty unexpected one. Negative belief number 1. You are gross, stinky, and dysfunctional. Buy our product to fix it. Okay, so let's face it. So much of the movement we saw towards commercialized, made in a lab, artificially perfumed products beginning in the 90s and 40s was due to really smart mass marketing. This was marketing that played on what are most people's natural insecurities. For example, the fear that one might smell bad to other people without realizing it, and that the only way to prevent this is to buy said company's perfumed products and use them regularly as a sort of insurance policy.
This is so true. In the modern era, we are taught that anything natural, anything with our bodies is kind of gross. The way you smell, the way your hair looks, you're broken and needs to be fixed. And what is the solution? Our products or this medication. But the key takeaway is that you're not good enough as you are naturally, because that would mean you're not dependent on them.
This kind of mass fear-based marketing was also used in a larger and more insidious way. That is, to convince people that their bodies were naturally dirty, full of disease-causing bacteria, and frankly, just dysfunctional. That is, you couldn't trust your scalp to not produce way too much oil, you couldn't count on not having dandruff, and you couldn't count on having healthy hair. Rather, negative disease states to do with the scalp or the hair, like dandruff, frizzy or weak hair, or balding, were just the default position. So that is, unless you purchased these heavy-handed, made-in-a-lab chemical concoctions to correct the mistakes of nature. So in other words, your hair and scalp's natural state was to be completely dysfunctional, and the only way to band-aid this was with external artificial products. Okay.
Yeah, and I love that she said artificial products because they use chemicals to achieve certain results. And it might look good on the outside, but on the inside, your body will be suffering. And it will do more harm than good in most cases. But we are biological, so we need biological solutions. So things we can find in nature. We do not need more chemicals. And also when it comes to bacteria, we need certain amounts of bacteria. It's natural and it's actually good for us. It's good for our immune system. And they have actually seen that when we are too clean, we are actually getting sicker, especially in autoimmune diseases and allergies. So like, for example, during COVID, a lot of people used alcohol on their hands to get rid of all of the bacteria. But we have good bacteria on the hands as well. And we are actually disrupting the microbiome on the hand when we're doing that. So the skin is also a part of our immune system. So products needs to be made from natural ingredients to really work well with our bodies.
So am I saying that we should never use hair products? Of course not. People throughout history have used all sorts of products on their hair and scalp. But I would suggest that there are 2 big differences with a healthy, discretionary use of products to the kind of mass fear marketing beginning in the 20th century. So 1, products throughout history were generally used with a healthier attitude. So they didn't believe that their hair or body were dysfunctional. They believed that they were smart and perfect the way they were. But perhaps there were still challenges or things they would like to improve, but the goal of any product used would be to mobilize and encourage the body's own drive towards health and homeostasis.
Preach.
Do you see how this is really different? This leads me to reason number 2, that healthy use of products is different than the fear marketing pushed in the 20th century. Products should almost always be based on natural ingredients that are as unprocessed as possible. Why? Because this is just what our bodies are designed to recognize and respond to. Yes, herbal and natural treatments can treat certain symptoms, but they usually do so in a more holistic way that can adjust based on the individual's needs. Quick example, lavender essential oil can be added to hair treatments of all kinds and is known as a balancing oil. So in other words, if you have too much oil production, it can help to calm it down. Or if you have too little oil production, it can help to encourage more oil production. To me, this suggests that the lavender oil is not simply band-aiding specific symptoms, but rather helping to mobilize the body's own desire for healing and homeostasis. Bad advice number 2.
I think it's so good that she emphasizes that we should work with the body and not against it. And there's nothing wrong with how you are naturally, but there are things that you can do to improve or boost the body's own ability to do certain stuff. And that you can encourage that through different methods. Just having that perspective really shifts the way that you view yourself, right? So it kind of becomes like a philosophy also that there is nothing wrong with me. There is nothing that I need from the outside to be fixed, but rather things I can do to support my body to perhaps improve my appearance even more or my health even more so that the body can do its work more efficiently.
So the second piece of hair care advice that ruined an entire generation is that your hair exists merely as a fashion accessory or a sort of cosmetic appendage. In other words, your hair is much like your clothing or accessories, lifeless in itself, dead and meaningless, except insofar as it allows you to follow the latest trends or to suit your personal whims of how you want to present yourself. Compare this to the traditional, historical, or holistic view of hair, which is that hair is an extension of oneself or a reflection of our inner being and state of health, and that it is deeply personal. Okay, so here's what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that hair was never viewed as a way to express oneself or even to follow fashion trends in history. Rather, that simply wasn't the only thing it was. It was also much, much more. In the modern day, we have kind of taken this full reality of what hair really is and flattened it down to what we consider the most important thing, which is how it looks outwardly. Therefore, we are willing to do all kinds of objectively harmful things to our hair, like chemical hair dyes, curling or straightening treatments, heat tools, aerosol hairspray, back combing, etc., all to try to achieve a certain outward look. So what every person who values the long-term health of their hair and inner being needs to do, ideally, is to develop their own sense of who they are and what their hair is on the deepest level. They need to get a sense of what is good for them, ultimately, and what is good for their hair. And then, when the desire arises to do something to your hair to achieve a certain look, which is completely natural, we can weigh this against the deeper understanding of what our hair truly is. And this is going to look different for everyone.
And I would also say that shiny, long, strong, healthy hair also is a sign of what's going on the inside. So if you have good quality of hair, it usually shows that you have good health and perhaps even good fertility, which of course is more attractive. If someone looks really healthy and very fertile, that's attractive in a sense. And so it's also a cue to everyone else around you how you're actually doing on the inside, whether they think about it consciously or not.
For me, since I view my hair as an extension of my body and a living thing, I choose not to ever use heat on it, especially in the form of direct heat like straighteners or curlers. Why? Because I wouldn't apply a hot iron to any other part of my body, so why my hair? Just because I can't feel immediate pain from doing so like I would on my skin doesn't mean there isn't damage occurring. But I do choose to use other non-damaging techniques to style my hair and achieve the look that I desire. It's just all about determining where that line is for oneself. Bad advice number 3.
And nowadays, there are so many ways that you can create curls without heat. I like to use tools like this or rollers. It perhaps takes a little bit more time and patience, but it's so easy. When your hair is damp, you take this and you strap it on and then fold it like this, but in a better way. And then you wait till it's dried. And then you have curls. And there are so many other things you can do as well. And like she said, it will not cause you any pain like on the skin, but you will be able to see the quality later and how it's deteriorating.
Hair should be dramatically shaped through cutting. So one of the biggest changes that began happening in the 20th century was this idea that hair should be dramatically shaped through cutting. Now, yes, women have always wanted to shape and style their hair to make a fashion statement or to suit their face. However, in most times and cultures, this styling and shaping was achieved through the way the hair was styled, not the way it was cut. Generally, people believed that hair was best kept at relatively the same length, meaning no layers. This also helped to keep ends healthier since there is strength in numbers, and it helped to avoid the modern problem of fatty, modern haircuts with lots of layers, causing a nightmare when needing to be grown back out. Haircuts like this also make protective styles more difficult to achieve, but more on that in the last point. Finally, this belief leads to a culture in which it is considered completely normal and even encouraged to cut our hair dramatically to suit a transitory mood or fad. And while this is of course perfectly fine and up to each individual, having a culture where this is viewed as normal and encouraged can be problematic. Now, it is entirely normal to use our hair to suit our moods and our fancies, but ideally this will be achieved through more minor changes that aren't permanent, like styling it differently, for instance.
So basically what she says is that when you cut your hair in layers, the ends will break more easily because before they used to be thick all the way out, and so the hairs would kind of protect themselves. But now you have some that stands alone and are more prone to breakage through brushing or other things like that than if they were all together and a lot thicker in a clump.
Hair should always be worn loose. Okay, so this is a big one, and I would say it's pretty unexpected. On the surface, it may not seem like it's such a big deal. After all, what's the problem with wearing hair loose? I'm wearing my hair loose right now. Nothing is wrong with wearing your hair loose, of course. However, a society that defines loose hair as the default option and everyday updos typically as something we only use when we are busy or frazzled, or maybe we're a professional athlete and we're in the middle of a sport, that makes a huge difference in how we view and care for our hair. This philosophy will probably lead to generally shorter hair lengths being viewed as the norm, which is of course what we've seen happen, because longer hair is obviously a lot more convenient to wear loose on the daily. The historical mindset of hair being an extension of oneself and not merely a cosmetic appendage, as we talked about earlier, typically goes hand in hand with wearing hair up in protective styles more often. In other words, if my hair is a part of me and it has intrinsic value apart from just how it looks, then it's not just an accessory that needs to be flaunted all the time in order to look put together. Okay, but really when you get down to it, what's the problem with wearing hair loose all of the time? So the main result of a culture that wears hair loose all the time, or at least encourages this as the default, will be the overuse of styling of all kinds. So I'm talking about things like hair dyes, chemical treatments, frequent shampooing, tons of styling products, heat tools, you name it. All of these will be and are overused in a culture that views loose hair as the normal default option. The fact is that updos, braids, and protective styles are not only more protective for the hair by keeping the fragile ends tucked away, but it also means that all of these aforementioned damaging practices will simply be used less often, since updos or even braids hide so much more and don't require a ton of processing on the hair itself to look nice. Okay, so with all of that said, this has been the top 4 pieces of hair care advice that ruined an entire generation. Thanks for joining me for this investigation of our culture's hair philosophies.
Her way of viewing this was very interesting, and it's something that we don't think so much about, how much society actually shapes us, even in philosophies like this. And you might not agree with everything she said, but I hope you found it helpful. Before, I didn't really like histories because I didn't find it useful to always go back to what had been. But now I actually find it more interesting and even helpful because it shows what we have been doing for centuries that actually worked. And it also shows patterns. And it actually gives me different perspectives, both on the way we're viewing life, but also on the things we're doing and why we're doing it. I really hope you found this video helpful. I will also add some techniques and methods that you can improve and strengthen your hair naturally through nutrition. Because if you're deficient in nutrients, your body cannot prioritize hair, nails, and skin, because that's not essential for your survival. And so I will pin a link in the comments to my Hashimoto's Reset community. Inside there, I will add everything that you need to basically grow your hair. So go check it out. And remember, when your thyroid thrives, you thrive. And take care until next time.